All right. Welcome back to the Retic Rebellion podcast. I'm Lee. I have Bill and Levi with me. And today we have Garrett Hartle from Reach Out Reptiles. And we are talking about the history of super dwarves.
What's up,
How
guys?
is
Thanks for having me
everyone?
on.
Episode
Yeah,
20.
thanks for coming. Thanks for
Yeah, it's good
coming.
to see you guys again. Usually, when I'm hanging out with Bill and Lee, we're herping out in the Phoenix area. That's been the
Yeah.
last couple times. That was really fun. Remember finding
Yeah,
that real thirsty rattlesnake and giving them water out of the bottle and all that?
Oh, yeah. I just came across those pictures yesterday, actually. I was looking at it. I was like, oh, I remember that. It was like a 20-hour trip. It was awesome.
Good times. Yeah,
Good
our
times.
very
trip
cool.
was
Looking
about
forward to
4
getting to know
hours.
you, Levi. This should be fun.
You're like one of the only big names I have left on my list to interview.
Well, we're
I've
getting
knocked off
you're
almost all of
you're
them.
you're getting me in the original Reach Out Reptiles room here. We actually still have some retics at the Hartle house. This is the basement. We got the old sink that started the crappy chic movement, as my wife called it. The way we do everything at Reach Out Reptiles. Now that we got the big shop, so here we
Yep.
go. Back to the
That's
roots.
crazy.
Wow.
heck,
Yeah.
yeah.
Heck yeah.
So what do we want to talk about tonight? How's it going, Todd Danielson? I know this guy. He's got some fun stuff for Super Dwarfs, that's for sure.
Yeah, he sure does. Todd comes in a lot. We love Todd. We love Todd here.
Yeah.
But
I love Todd because
basically,
he's a Kluber guy.
yeah, basically wanted to kind of get into the history of super dwarfs. Kind of like nothing too crazy specific, but kind of generals. When they came in, when they were kind of founded, noticed, imports, kind of when they became popular, the localities became popular, that kind of stuff. The history behind that, and then obviously your history. Then run it into your history with them.
Cool. Sounds good. I
All
mean,
right.
yeah, you want me to just fire away a couple of things or you guys got specific stuff? What do you want to how you want to take this?
Rattle it off, man. Go for
You're pretty good at this. I think let's start
it.
from Super Dwarfs started. I'm just kidding. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Super Dwarf started when I was a wee boy. That's how old I am. No, so I think I'm sure that your audience knows by now just the general definition of a super dwarf. It can be kind of confusing sometimes. It's not like a super pastel ball python or anything. It's not any kind of genetic mutation or that type of dwarfism. It's a naturally occurring race, if you will, of reticulated pythons. There's the island of Sulawesi has like this little island chain that looks like sort of like the Florida Keys going the other direction, right? And there's a bunch of retics on there, and our specialization are the retics from that island chain. So there's 7 different pure localities that came from what they call the Solaire Archipelago that have made their way into the U.S. with known locality data. I guess is a good caveat. Over the years in the US and in the early days of Reach Out Reptiles, I tried to scoop that stuff up. I felt like they were a little bit underappreciated, um, and generally used just to outcross. They're like some of them are like miraculously small from a retic perspective, right? Like some of our breeding adult females, like not even the smallest, just like a good average size for some of the smaller girls. They're laying eggs and weighing like 3,000 grams after they laid. This is like ball python territory for a snake that's kind of the largest snake on the planet, arguably, anyways. Um, so it's kind of crazy. I remember the first time that I was introduced to dwarf and super dwarf retics was because of Bob Clark. He was actually involved in some of the original imports. I mean, what kind of retic didn't Bob Clark start? It seems like, right? We just recently interviewed him on our YouTube channel with the piebald stuff. But this would have been, I think, in the late 90s. I was still in high school. I'm reading Reptiles magazine, and he's got these pictures of his albino retics were all the rage back then. Us old people, you might remember like a lavender retic. It had like the most psychedelic colors on it. Bill, I think you would appreciate this. His original ad said, "You haven't seen colors like these since 1969." And he had his big lavender retic on there or whatever. And it was probably around 1999 that those ads were coming out. Well, sometime before then, like in the 90s, they had brought over some these retics the story, the rendition of that I was told. It was Mike Wilbanks had commissioned somebody to basically go through all of those islands, and they said, "Hey, listen, like the Jamps were already there. So if you're talking dwarf retics, they were there like a little bit earlier than that, yeah, like early '90s or whatever. The super dwarves started coming out towards like maybe early 2000s is when we started seeing them surfacing. I don't remember the exact date of his original import. You could ask Mike on that. But basically, those dwarf retics were jamps that Bob had made, and he bred and basically made dwarf het albinos, bred them back together, got dwarf albinos, and he did a whole write up on how much smaller the babies are and like they're staying smaller. He's feeding them the same. They hatched smaller, they stayed smaller, they grew smaller, and it was pretty cool. And so that set off all the rage. Dwarf retics are a thing. People could see all the results and stuff like that. And then this expedition that Mike Wilbanks founded was because there was an exporter telling him there's even smaller retics further down the island chain. So on some of the smaller and more remote things. The thing to realize is that the mechanism, the biological mechanism that's making them small is insular dwarfism, right? Like you're on a more restricted island. So some of these islands are pretty big places. Indonesia has, I think, over 17,000 islands. And this
Mhm.
is just one chain. Some of them are really small. So Slayer's a pretty good size island as far as, populations of retics go. Jampea is down below it, and then you have a couple small ones like Tombalongan and Kayawati. Then you have these three really tiny remote ones way out there, and that's Karompa, Madu, and Kalatoa. So they ran an expedition. They got a bag. They threw a bunch of snakes in there, and they brought them all back. Mike was saying it was over 100 animals. He said it might have been closer to 200. So this was a lot of super dwarves. He basically said, I want all of them, bring them all in. Bob Clark got involved because obviously he had been doing the dwarf albinos and stuff. He bought into some of that stuff, and then off they went. As far as I'm, and like this is based on conversations and stuff that I've had with these guys. But I think Mike only ever did the one export or import, but it was a huge one. And a little bit of a fun history, they didn't have like good locality data on this stuff at this time. Some of these islands didn't even have like real names. Like a lot of people had early with the early imports got these Honey Island retics. Then later you started seeing Madu retics. It's the same island, just had like different names. They've been spelled differently throughout time. They've been called different things, translated back and forth for like Honey Island, Madu, whatever, between local languages and English, and there's a lot of different confusion. I actually like getting old maps of the region because the spellings and stuff are hilarious. I got into that a little bit on our Tombalongan locality spotlight. But anyway, so they didn't know necessarily the names of these. You have to realize this was like pre-Google Maps. You couldn't just like Google Superdorf Island and then like go look at a pin on there. You know what I'm saying? Like these things are none of that stuff was there. They actually predated like, gosh, I don't know. Let's see. I was first time I saw the internet was like 1999, and this is like right before this stuff started coming in, or maybe around the same time. And so, yeah, it was a different world. But Mike basically decided to grab all these mixed island retics and call them super dwarfs because they already had the dwarf retics. And he's like, well, Mike was saying like people would always ask him the locality data, and he's like, I don't have it. I don't know. The importer didn't disclose it. By the way, the importer's name was Duncan McCrae. I haven't got the chance to talk to him about all these stories yet. I would love to do that at some point. But yeah, big expedition stuff came in, and some of them were gravid. Wild caught super dwarf females are notoriously challenging to get established and breed. So a lot of the bloodlines that we have come from relatively few. Like a lot of stuff was imported. Like here's a wild caught animal for the pet trade, right? Like lot of the pet trade was set up that way. But these animals didn't breed very easily in captivity, but some of them actually produce clutches, gravid from the wild, and those started a lot of the original bloodlines. So there's a variety of importers after that. After that original surge of super dwarves, we still work with a lot of those bloodlines. We'll refer to them as like old school super dwarves. Um, and so that's like a non-locality specific, but did come from those islands. Something that confuses a lot of people. Like, how do you know if they're super dwarves if you don't know what the locality is? Well, they went down to these islands past Jampea, collected a bunch of snakes, and brought them back. Right, and that's generally those are the islands that Madu, Karampa, Kalatoa are considered the smallest of the small super dwarfs. So that's where the old school super dwarf comes from. And we still just call them super dwarfs. Some people over time have like tried to pick out what the localities were, identify them later, and that causes all kinds of problems. You know, there's a lot of human error involved in that, or things like that. But as the island started to come out, Kalatoa rose as one of the most popular. I would suspect that most of the stuff that came in the original stuff was from Kalatoa, but you did have mixed animals. And then as they began captive breeding, you know, it got even worse as far as like you now got 50-50 crosses and so on and so forth. So, but people learned that island named Kalatoa and started to slap that on everything and stuff like that. So a lot of the old original, what people call Kalatoa, or maybe is represented in percentages of their modern day crosses and stuff, if it goes back to that original Mike Wilbanks import, you know, you got to watch that stuff. But it wasn't very long until people did start getting island names and then seeing them, noticing differences and stuff like that. And then, you know, it went on for a long time. 2015 is when they finally shut down imports. So there was a number of different imports with a number of different importers here in the US and also overseas. You know, Europe got quite a few. I've got some friends in South America that have carampas, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. And so they are a global phenomenon for sure. But there was a lot of different imports that came in over time, and you know, as they started to notice, like these guys are different. Like there's significant differences from the animals on the different islands. That information started to become a little bit more interesting. In the back in the day, it was like pre, let's say 2015, or even a little bit earlier than that. A pure superdwarf, what we would call pure locality superdwarf. No one called them that. They would say like, oh, it's a Kalatoa locale or whatever. A wild type that we refer to is just like a normal. Everyone say they're normal. I kind of stopped calling retics normal because I'm like, what is a normal retic? It's like one of the most widespread and varied animals on the planet, right? So, but yeah, I remember back in those early days, someone would breed it to, for example, like the hot new morphs like tiger, you know, and they'd be like, "Oh, super dwarf tiger, that's so cool." And you could get a normal retic, which would be like a pure super dwarf for maybe $500, but a super dwarf tiger would be like $800. I remember the first time I saw a super dwarf super tiger was during the time when they were starting to figure out aneurysm, which is a whole other story because it's the only naturally occurring genetic mutation to come from these islands. And I remember in Texas, I saw at Jason Reed's table, he had a super dwarf super tiger, and it was like black, white, and silver, striped head to tail. And it was an Anery super tiger. Just people didn't know Anery was Anery yet, you know. And so there was
Mhm.
different traits coming up and all this. But yeah, it was funny. Now a super dwarf tiger, you know, you're like, okay, what locality, what percentage? That's kind of a basic question that we ask ourselves these days. None of that really happened much back then. You know, I'm
Mm.
talking like say 2010 and earlier. It was just like here's a normal super dwarf, here's a tiger super dwarf. Tiger must be better, right? Oh, I'm getting an echo there.
Yeah, I'm getting an echo. So am I.
Someone take their
That's
headphones
really
off.
weird. Yeah.
I think it fixed.
Okay, there we go.
We good?
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So anyway, that was kind of it, and that's back. That's way before Reach Out Reptiles or any of that. I do have here. I'll have to text you this picture, Lee. You guys want to
Okay.
share? I don't know if would you share a bite picture? If it make a
Yes.
special exception over here. All right, I'm
Nope.
gonna
Nope. We
send you.
definitely will show that.
Oh, okay. You guys are like that. Now I see what kind of crowd I'm
Yeah.
hanging with here
Yeah.
tonight.
He
All
did.
right.
Yeah.
I can't talk. I've got a great video called "What to Do If a Snake Bites You and Doesn't Let Go." You ever see that one?
Bite its
Yeah.
tail.
Yeah, I learned that over in Indonesia. It actually became common, like standard safety practice at Prehistoric Pets when I worked there. So, big advocate of chewing on their tail versus blasting their face with chemicals or whatever. All right,
Me and
Lee,
Bill have
this
experience
is
with that.
Yeah.
blasting their face with chemicals or chewing on their tails.
Chewing on their
Just
tail.
being bit. Yeah. Chewing on the
Oh
tail.
yeah, yeah. Well, retics are crazy. You know, the superdwarves a lot of times are eating like bats and stuff in the wild, like lots of small retics and stuff. So they're good at biting stuff. You know, you gotta know what you're doing. So I just sent you a picture. This was actually me with my first retic that I bought as a dwarf retic from Bob Clark. I think I was 15 years old. So I don't think superdwarves existed in the United States in captivity, at least not intentionally at the time that picture was taken. So
Wow.
I've been into him for a while. That was my second snake. Well, I'll say second exotic snake. You know, we were all sneaking stuff and hiding it in boxes under our beds when we were kids, right? But that my very first snake I was allowed to purchase by my mother, who hated snakes, was a carpet python. I don't even know. I think it was an IJ. But very shortly after, I got my first retic, and then I was like, "This is the snake to end all snakes." I got a dwarf because it seemed
Yeah.
like the responsible thing to do. If you look at the picture, you can see my age. I was pretty young. I felt pretty proud of myself for taking that
Yeah.
gnarly bite, you know, a couple pinpricks or
Yeah.
whatever, lots of blood. My shirtless, you know, chubby Garrett and you know, I was helping it shed. It had a stuck eye cap and didn't like me
Oh, and it
messing with
got
it. So
you?
yeah, that's when it bit me when I was like helping him shed or whatever. I think it was a
Yeah.
wild caught animal. It could have been captive bred. I don't have, you know what I mean, any real
Yeah.
history other than it was Jampea. But again, like they didn't really track lineage or percentage. It could have been a mutt. It could have been a pure. Who knows? Um, so that stuff started to become a lot more important. I was actually mentioning this to Lee. If you talk about history of superdwarfs in captivity and like what superdwarfs are today, probably the singular most important event. I mean, it seems like bringing them into captivity would be important, but like people didn't pay that much attention. You had a few people that were like, it was like having an Aurora house snake or something like, or a Cape snake. Yeah, there you go. Look at me in my bad
Look at
self. I look
that.
so much like my 10-year-old son. So I think I was 15 or something in that picture.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
crazy.
Yeah,
That is
I'm
awesome.
looking at the rosettes. You can't see the snake too much, but like those are big, very inky black rosettes. Kind of reminds me of the
Yeah.
snake I had named Jezebel. But yeah,
Oh, we have a Jezebel.
We do.
I know. That's a common snake name, I
And guess
think.
where it came from?
Oh,
Reach
really?
Out
Where?
Reptiles. It's that G-stripe girl.
Let's go. I wonder if it's related to my Jezebel. Runs in the
You
family.
remember I bought that G-stripe pair right when I opened. That's one of the girls.
Oh,
That
okay,
G-stripe
cool.
pair, yeah.
Yeah. Did you see the Kalatoa G stripes we made last year? They did not
No.
look anything like what I expected. This is the fun stuff is bringing the locality influence in. It changes stuff so much. And with the 7 different like flavors of dwarf and super dwarf that
Mm-hmm.
you have, it's like super fun. But anyway,
Yeah.
in 2015, retics were added to the Lacey Act along with everything else. That like berms were the big snake back then because they were the first to be added. They're the ones that were invasive in Florida, and it crashed that market overnight. It was insane, and it's been very encouraging to see that build back up these days. But retics certainly were big money. There was a lot of cool morphs and things running back then. But that year is probably the most influential because it made people realize that, well, it set the stage, let's say. I don't think it made anyone realize anything. A lot of people were dumping their snakes. These are going to be illegal, and they would sell them, which I thought was crazy. I was like, if they're not going to let you have them anymore, but you already have them now, like, and this is for me my favorite snake, I'm not giving them up. I got them here. You can do whatever you want. Kind of like come and get them situation. You know what I mean? Like, you're not getting
Mhm.
my snakes. And they weren't making them illegal. They were just making it illegal to transport across state lines. So to me, that kind of showed like everyone's just in this for the money. Why are they getting rid of them? Um, but I thought that they deserved a little bit more appreciation, even just as the pure and the wild caught animals and for what they were. No one really knew what was going to happen with it, but there was a little interim time where no one knew what was going to happen, and the market was all over the place. And I used it to make a bunch of phone calls and buy up a bunch of retics. Interestingly enough, I don't know why I keep name dropping old Bob here, but one of the calls, I don't even know if you remember this, when the Lacey Act went through and everyone's like, oh, and everyone was dumping their retics, Bob had started the hypo project and he had never
Mhm.
bred a captive bred hypo yet. He just had the original wild caught animal and all the hets. So my first call was, hey, Bob Clark, I don't think retics are going to be worth any money anymore. You're not allowed to sell them at state lines. I don't know where you stand on this, but what do you say you sell me that hypo project? I'll buy all the hets and the original wild caught animal. I had $30,000 to spend. So I offered him, well, I don't even know if I got to the point of offering him a price. I just pitched him the idea. Would you sell me the hypo project? I thought it would be a fun hobby to have, even if they were worthless, right? Or I could only sell them in Pennsylvania. You know what he told me? I think this would surprise a lot of people. I think a lot of people think a lot of things about Bob without knowing him. But he goes, Garrett, I appreciate that, but not everything is for the money. And I was like, all right, respect. So instead, I went and bought up all the obscure random locality super dwarfs that I could with that $30,000. And that's what started Retire Reptiles. So the business actually was founded and started in 2015. And I just quietly did stuff for 2 years with the animals, buying them up, beginning a collection, coming up with a marketing plan. And in 2017 is when I started to go a little bit more public with it. But our intention at Reach Our Reptiles has been to basically have and try to preserve those 7 localities that were all of the ones that were brought to the US, and some of them in extremely limited numbers. You know what I mean? Like crazy how many animals were imported and then just sold into the pet trade. And, people buy animals in general, but especially retics, and they get into them like, oh, retic, or you hear, ooh, super dwarf, that stays small. That means it'll be easier. And then you get a wild caught animal. You know what I'm saying? That's like
Mhm.
sickly and angry and doesn't want to eat what you want to give it. It won't breed for you. You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
it's just not a good idea to, you know, try to have a wild caught retic, I think, as a pet. But it's not even an
Yeah.
option anymore, really. So that's probably not a bad thing for the animals that we have in captivity that happened, um I think it's a bad thing for genetic diversity viably long term in the United States. But the good thing with at least the dwarf and super dwarf retics is that they are, as insular dwarfs, they have such a high level of homozygosity in their genetics, anyways. Basically, what I'm saying is they're little inbred islands full of small snakes. So anything that
Mhm.
was bad, like when you're doing mainland breedings or breeding for morphs, and you breed back, you might have 2 animals that are like have single copies of a gene that might give you, let's say, an enlarged heart or something, and you breed them together and now you're making unhealthy animals, something you have to watch out for in any purebred domesticated animal, right? But with super dwarfs, they've been sitting out on these islands for so long that if there was anything in the genetic material that was deleterious in any way, it would have been brought to the surface and those animals died. So you're coming in behind all the natural selection for like the perfect snake that
Yeah.
nature created. So
Yeah.
but that was really when it launched. And then as far as Reach Our Reptiles go, we just started to try to educate about these things as we learn ourselves and do all that kind of stuff openly since 2017. Um, our company started in 2015, and like as you can see, I had a bunch of these retics, and it was nice. Even when I started, there was a lot of people who knew me that I loved these locality retics. I'd had a ton of conversations and a really good network before I even started the business because I've been geeking out on them my whole life already. So
Yeah.
that
When
kind of
you
catches us up today on that generalities.
when you started, how many of the 7 localities were you able to get a hold of? Were you able to get a hold of all 7, or just 4, 3, 5? How many of the localities were you able to start with? And then when did you end up, if you didn't have all 7, when did you officially get all 7?
So I actually over purchased and I ended up with like 12 or 14 pure localities, but a lot of them weren't the dwarf stuff. So I had like other localities in there and stuff like that. Hey, thanks. Appreciate that. Um, and then I kind of whittled my collection down to focus on that, just those 7, um, as I started learning more about them and stuff. So I'm trying to remember. So the Jamps I had, the Kalatoas I had, the Karampas were very hard to get a hold of. And if you watch some of our early videos on Reach Our
Mm-hmm.
Reptiles, there's actually me going
Goosenberg.
and unboxing like my first Karampa, and I think every Karampa, because it got down to like all of the pure Karampas in the country today. We're the first ones in the US to breed them. And I think we're the only ones to have bred them from those wild caught animals, with the exception of a buddy of mine that actually picked up some of my original wild caught animals. So he bred them too, but they were the same bloodline, right? So, but it got down to 5 animals in the US. So everything, and most of them actually come from 2. So there was 5, and we have the bloodlines from those Karampas or whatever. So that was a tough one. The Madus were pretty easy, but there just was never a whole lot of them. There are other ones like kicking around too. This is the other thing, is like there's actually a lot of stuff hiding out there that people have just as pets. Like there's other Madus that are like wild caught imported Madus that are in people's collection that are just chilling. They might literally be geriatric at this point because imports stopped at 2015. A lot of the really good, like more exotic localities, if you want to talk about like Karampas, Madhu stuff, they were brought in more towards the end of that, especially with the good locality data. Um, the Coyotes I actually started working with Coyotes really early on. Coyote is the original captive bred super dwarf locality. There was 2 females that were brought in that were gravid by Bushmaster reptiles, and they laid clutches. And then there's a guy named Winslow Murdoch, who's an East Coast guy. I was living in California at the time, and he bought himself originally what he thought was 2 pairs, 1 pair from each of the wild caught. So these are like F1s, really like F0s. I don't know how you would count that because they're like bred in the wild and hatched
Yeah.
in captivity, right? So, but he bought a pair of each so that he could have unrelated blood, and brought them to the East Coast and bred a ton of them. He just bred a ton of them. They, had a really prolific female that went year after year after year. And the funny thing was his 2 pairs actually ended up being 3.1. So somebody had missexed one of the original animals. So anyway, that's what started that. So you'll hear of that a lot. I always call him Doc Murdoch. That was like my fun name for him because he's a physician. So I'm like, hey, it's the Doc Murdoch. What's going on? And so I had gotten animals from him way back in the day and outcrossed them. I unfortunately didn't keep any pures from back in the day, but I circled around, and when I found him, I actually ran into him at Northeast Carpet Fest, and he introduced himself, and I was like, that's you? Because I only knew people from like talking on the old, wired phones and stuff back then. So it was cool. I told him some of the history that we had. I actually was able to gift him back an animal from my original breedings with his, where I was like, your pure was the grandfather of this. And I made a purple albino that was 25% Coyote Winslow Murdoch line. But you got to watch those lines because, like, how do you count that? That's 3 males and 1 female. You know what I mean? And 2 of the males, I think he used to that original female. The third one he didn't because he thought it was a female the whole time. I ended up with that animal and I produced from that animal. So like the Murdoch line is actually two different bloodlines, right? Two
Mm,
supposedly unrelated.
yeah.
And that's kind of the stuff that you get into with that. That's why we don't ever name, there's no reach out reptiles line anything. We've named the animals like you do with a dog or a horse so that you can track it a little bit better. It goes back to the white diamond line, for example, is a selectively bred bloodline of snows that we have that's really well known. um but yeah, we named all of our animals and bred them up from there. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
We ran into one of those white diamonds at the show.
Oh really? Yeah,
Yeah.
they're pretty,
Yeah.
they're good looking, man. They were from one of the first clutches that ever produced, to circle back to aneurysm. um Remember I said Bob Clark had made dwarf like Jamp albinos.
Yeah.
So somebody
Hmm.
took one, and then when the Superdwarfs came in, they bred the Jamp albino to a Superdwarf. Well, they didn't know at the time that that Superdwarf was an anery, or at least a head anery. And so they were just trying to make Superdwarf albinos. So that original bloodline was from a 50% Jamp, if we track it modern way, right? We had to go back and like uncover all this to get to where we are today, but to a pure Superdwarf, making the babies 50% Superdwarf and 25% Jamp, and they were het for albino. They're actually double het snows. When those animals were bred together, they were the original animals, I think, were produced in Canada. And then that project, for example, was split. Some of the animals went to Prehistoric Pets, some of them went to a guy named Corey Browning. Some people still call him the Corey Browning line. Again, like everyone renamed lines when they went to them, like like people will do this, like I'll buy a Prehistoric Pets line and a Corey Browning line so I get unrelated animals. You're like, ah, like those were all siblings, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
they hatched first at Prehistoric Pets and they're looking at it. And Tim O'Reilly was like, what is going on with this? And then they had a beautiful display of all four morphs because you get the wild type, you get the anery, you get the albino, and you get the snow, right? And they're like, these are not just normals and albinos. What's happening here? And they started focusing on that anery and seeing what's going on. They took those, they bred them out, they put them to platinums, bred back, hit it, proved it recessive.
Hmm.
And like the rest was history. But it's been really fun as I am trying to preserve these pure localities, the seven that I like to work with. So it's seven localities, but I have multiple bloodlines within each locality, as many as I was able to get. The only exception I think is the Tomballongans. We have one bloodline of those, and they were founded by Karsten Wollner in Germany. He actually bred them there. He was chasing a morph too. The original was, I'll see if I can dig an old picture up. The original was a calico male. And so he grabbed one and he grabbed a couple females from the same island, hoping they would be hets. He called them the black-eyed candies, and bred and produced and was never able to produce a calico. But what he did make was pure Tomballongans. And he sent a couple pairs to the US. All the other ones fell by the wayside. One pair stayed and bred. And from that one pair of sibling Tomballongans, we have all the Tomballongans that we made today. That's been the toughest, to answer your question, Lee. I actually
Hmm.
had them early on, but I bought every Tom Belongin that was produced by this original pair, that I could get my hands on, and there was one pair that slipped away, and I kept getting missexed animals. So I think I bought like it was, I don't know, close to 20 males to get three females. And then I had to grow them up. It was actually I only got two females. The pair that was sold to the other guy was a legitimate pair, and I tracked them down later. I only got picked those up like 2 years ago. I couldn't believe that I found them. I was like, "This is the missing pair." You know what I mean? I had pictures of the
Hmm.
original hatchlings as babies and all that kind of stuff. So it was
That's
kind
so
of fun.
wild.
Which
Yeah.
locality is your personal favorite, Garrett?
Oh, that's a dirty question, but Bill.
That's
Yeah.
a loaded question.
I have an answer for you though. Um, So what I'll say is this: the probably the most extreme, if you're going for like small super dwarfy sizes from the two flavors, you kind of have the Saputrii side and the Jampana side. even though they're not technically all tested from those islands or whatever. But the king of the super dwarfy side are the Karumpas. They're the smallest, they're the craziest patterns, they have excellent temperaments. They're outrageously small, like miraculously small. You can't believe this thing is a retic. And then from the other side, where you have the Slayers, you have the Tombalongans that I was just mentioning. And those Tombalongans are thick, like French bulldog heads, almost stubby, bright gold, thick inky blacks. They look nothing like a Karampa. So those are the two extreme localities. Maybe the most exciting from I mean, they all have their merits, but if you're pushing for the extremes, those are the good ones. I think honestly, though, my favorite has always been the Jampayas, and it's probably sentimental going back to that old picture and stuff like that. But yeah, I have always liked the Jamps. I used to joke around. I actually bottled some of this up before I was into breeding these for size. I used to say 25% Jamp is the perfect amount. It's you still get your big retic that I love, but they have that sleek, narrow head, that sexy, like pencil thin pattern, some really cool blue grays in there. So I was like, I called it, it's like a retic with a little Jamp sauce on top. And I
Mhm.
say it all the time in my videos to the point where on my Patreon group, we actually had hot sauce made and called it Jamp sauce. We bottled it up. I've still got a few bottles around the shop. I'll have to send some to you guys. Pretty good stuff. So I still like the Jampayas. They get a bad rap. They were some of the earliest stuff. This is, going back 20 years, well, 20 plus years, closer to 30 years now. um where people are like, I don't believe in dwarfs, like if you feed it, it'll get big. And so people did a lot of that real heavy feeding of jamps, nothing like what they would naturally experience in the wild. And so there was some like larger obese animals or things, or a lot of the early crossings, like nowadays to call something if I want to breed a jamp cross, let's say make tigers and call them dwarf tigers, I have to have at least 50% jampea in there, right? It's become an industry standard. Well, back then that didn't exist. So they breed real low percentage stuff, kind of like what I was talking about. 25% jamp is the best, um,
Mhm.
and call them jamps and everything. So people have a lot of, just different opinions and things from those sort of early days. But even with our imported jamps, like people are always amazed. The ones that are coming in as adults from the wild, like the body condition, how small they are. They're like, I thought they were really fat. You're like, well, some of them are really fat. You know what I mean? In captivity, that doesn't mean they were like
Yeah.
that in the wild, so stuff like that. But
Yeah.
The
yeah.
Kalatoa seems to be the most prominent in the retic, the super dwarfs. Why do you think that is? Is it just because they're the most plentiful, or do you think it's patterning or size, or what makes them, stand out?
Well, I mean, they are very small. So the three like real deal super dwarf, very small, non-disputable, tiny super dwarfs are the Kalatoa, Madu, and Karumpa. Madu and Karumpa are exceptionally rare, even in the wild. Both of those islands are only about a half a mile across, but
Holy
Karumpa
cow.
is a much bigger island. And so it just has a heavier population of animals in general. And so I think when they were running around collecting these things, you might get a honey island or a madu here and there, or a karumpa or karumpa or whatever here and there, but it was mostly kalatoas. So that's one side of it. I think they were the most commonly imported. Today, though, what you see is like some of the people that really got into it back in the day, they produced those very heavily, and made a lot of them. And then there's also like kind of the misrepresented side of the industry, which is definitely something you have to watch for with any locality animal, like especially something now. Remember I said normals were cheaper than morphs before, but now the pure localities have become more expensive. That was all happened after the ban. People used to argue that locality crosses should be dirt cheap and stuff, and I disagreed. And almost singularly, I don't know. I think I had some quiet supporters and stuff, but like when we bred the first Karampas and nobody else had any, I said, these are $10,000 a pair, which how do you price something like that? They'd never been made
Yeah.
before anywhere in the world. I mean, I knew they were rare. I knew they were spectacular. You said Todd Danielson's in here. He has some Karampas from us. How you like
Yeah.
your Karampas, Todd? I mean, yeah, you guys have some Karampas, right?
Yeah.
So, but I would basically they were so rare. I didn't care if I kept them all or not. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna put them up at 10 grand because people argue about localities or validity of this or whatever. People have different financial incentives. They have their egos to protect, something they've been saying for years they don't want to change, all those kinds of things. But the one language everyone universally, understands is money. And if you sell something for a lot of money, people respect them. So I said they were 10 grand and then I sold out like immediately. I barely got to keep, I think I kept one pair from the first clutch. I produced two clutches in the same year from two different pairs. I got to keep one pair from each clutch and then everything else sold out. And then it just started this wave of waiting lists that became literally a part of my business plan ever since. You'll still see when people produce, like even people that aren't us that produce these rare localities, they'll start waiting lists on them and stuff like that. So, because I
Yeah.
mean, it's 10
How
grand.
many
It's like, guess what? Here it is. Give me the
how
money
many were
now, sucker.
how many were in that first clutch, Garrett?
The first clutch was a pretty good size. I'd have to look back. It was 20, was it 2020 or 2021 on our website? The 2021s are up. I think I produced them first in 2020. I had two females. The first one's name is Fanny. She was very prolific. I think her clutch was, I got to remember, she had several clutches for me, but I think it was 16 animals in the first clutch. So pretty good size for a Karampa. She was super fat though. I actually had to diet her down for like a year and a half, just because of the way the previous guy had been keeping her. She wasn't breeding. Superdors, when they get too fat, they don't make good breeders. You know what I'm saying? So like you want to feed them and have like weight and bulk on them, but they are meant to be very fit and athletic snakes. So if you get them obese, they quit breeding. Or like if you have a real obese young one, you might get her to breed a couple clutches for you early on and then she crashes. And sometimes it's like 4 or 5 years of dieting before she'll breed for you again. So really you should keep them more like what they eat in the wild. And we still don't know a whole lot of that. So I would love to actually go out there and do some studies on that stuff, get some better data. But anyway, if you keep them like bulked, a lot of muscle, no fat, and then you can put a little extra fat on them as they're like building follicles and stuff, so they can put into egg yolks. That's how they seem to do the best. So that first clutch was like 16, and then the second girl that laid for me was much less. Her first clutch was decent, but it was one of these ones. She was also pretty fat, and they had real weak veins, so they were fertile eggs that came out with weak veins. And I think we only hatched like 7 or 8 of them. And then the second year that I went to breed them, I had a thermostat failure on an incubator. I had two clutches of Karampas in that incubator, and the rest of my entire season. I was still very small, but by this time I had already quit my job. I was all in on Super Dwarfs. I think this was the first year actually that I did quit my job, and I was like, okay, I'm going to work really hard. Got a lot of the different females to produce, pure localities, crosses, all this stuff. Filled the incubator up with eggs. I was like, okay, we're going to be good. Now I just have to teach people what dwarf and super dwarfs are, right? And then I had an incubation failure, and I lost like the entire season without a job. So I was like, "Ugh," that almost ended all of it. There's a video online about that you can watch in the old archives and stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
crazy stuff.
Wow.
I remember when that video dropped.
That was gut
That
wrench.
was devastating.
All these gray hairs on
Yeah.
the sides. People are like, "Garrett, you have 4 kids. It must be a lot of work." I'm like, dude, it's the Karampas. All the gray hairs are from Karampa. They're hanging
Yeah.
out with them too much and turning anery, naturally.
Turn into your favorite morph.
That's it. Yeah. It
Yeah.
is my favorite morph, though. How cool is it that it occurs naturally on these islands as a recessive
It's awesome.
genetic trait? So far,
That's
it's the
awesome.
only inheritable one that we know of, and I'll say so far because there's some other stuff going on we're working out still. But
That's a good question.
did I cry? I cried a lot. Yeah. Uh, I had actually just hired two people. So I had a gal named Jessica. This was during like the COVID stuff. Everyone was getting laid off. So it must have been, maybe it was that first year. And I'm getting my years mixed up. I've been doing this too long now. Anyway, some of my friends had gotten fired or laid off because of COVID, and like no jobs were available back then, right? So one of them was a gal that did all of my shipping previously. Her name was Jess. So I hired her as like an executive assistant. And then the other guy was Rob Roush, who ended up working with me for years, helped us build up. I mean, he was driving over here and working in my garage doing dishes, and you know what I mean? We used to have reusable bedding. What a terrible idea. Like you had to wash these like clothy things out. It was awful. But he spent a bunch of time doing that. And, we built up Reach Out Reptiles and everything back then, and, got the big building and all that stuff now. But that was scary times, that almost ended all of it, and I don't know if, like, to what extent the dwarf and super dwarves would be what they are without it. There was no other dwarf and super dwarf podcasts or this or that. There was nothing. They were just like a
Yeah.
new idea in the industry at that time. They hadn't caught on like they are today. So
Yeah.
Garrett,
Yeah.
continuing on with the Kalatoa and the lineage and stuff, I know there's
Sure.
been a lot of talk and even people changing descriptions on Morph Market regarding the TK line. And I'm a little confused on that. Was just wondering if you could give us a little clarification as to what exactly the TK line consists of and where some of that confusion might be coming from.
Sure. So there's nothing that I can say on this podcast that if you're out there and you bought something as a TK that I can say your snake's a Kalatoa. So you can write that off in the beginning. But where the confusion came from is that there was a conversation that happened online or whatever, stemming from the fact that TK stands for Travis Kubis. He was a guy that used to breed, and he hasn't. I mean, I think the last time he bred anything was 2013. So he actually stopped and got out of it even before that ban happened or anything like that. He had picked up a lot of the original imports, some of the Mike Wilbanks old school stuff, things like that. But this conversation had happened that he started with one pair of snakes, and that everything from there was the TK line. Kind of like I was talking about the Murdoch line, where that guy actually had two pairs of snakes,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, is that one bloodline? Like, why would we call that one bloodline? It would be better to know I got from pair A and pair B or whatever you want to call them, so that you can track lineages going down, right? Name the animals and let me know what's in my stuff. So anyway, Travis, like I said, these imports didn't just come in one time. He got some animals from Wilbanks. And then Bob Clark went on in talking to Bob Clark. He had actually imported multiple imports over the years and stuff like that to continue pulling his stock, as well as other people. I mean, Bushmaster Reptiles, Fascination Herps was a big one. I know Michael Cole brought a bunch of stuff in for over a long period of time. So Travis actually he had told me he had something like 6.20 animals, Superdorf animals in his collection. So some of them would have been the Superdorf animals. There was a pair of them that came in like really, really early that I know a lot of people were arguing like these are Jamps and stuff like that. But he had other stuff too. So there was multiple different bloodlines. But based on the misconception that it was like one snake, and then move forward, that was another thing. The other side of it that happened was, I don't think anybody's fault actually, where Superdorfs were coming in and we called them Superdorfs because we didn't know where they're coming from. I asked Wilbanks, he's like, people would always ask me, and I would just tell them it's Superdorf. He invented that word to name these smaller snakes because they didn't have locality data. And he's like, people still ask me, like, there's a misconception that he kept it a secret so no one else could go collect stuff. And Mike, at least what he told me was like, that never happened. We just didn't know where they came from. And I didn't want to apply it. Well, later when they started coming in, they came in, like you were saying, Bill, in larger numbers from Kalatoa. People are like, oh, Kalatoa is where they came from. So like everything kind of became a Kalatoa, which is a shame because some of the stuff that wasn't Kalatoa became Kalatoa so that people would sell it for more money or whatever and all that kind of stuff. So that was a thing that happened. But I'll tell you, back in those like earlier days, I actually talked to Travis quite a bit. I worked at Prehistoric Pets from 2009 to 2013, and 2013 is when he got out of it. That was the same time, just coincidentally, that I had left Prehistoric Pets. But I used to like purchase or trade. We would have like cool morphs and mainlands, and I was like, Prehistoric Pets, we should get into super dwarves. You know what I mean? Let's breed a lot of super dwarves. And Jay's like, why would you want that? Retics are supposed to be big. If you want a small snake, there's other species. And I'm like, are you serious? You're not telling me you just love retics because they're big? Like, I mean, I like them when they're big, but I like all the colors. I like the personality. I like their intelligence. I like all that other stuff. If I could have them smaller, I could have a lot more. And these superdores are pretty cool. So my experience with Travis Kubis from it during those years is that he would have clutches and he would tell me, okay, Garrett, these ones are from my Annery line. These are the super dwarves. They like he used to produce a lot of cool, very clean, very milky like Anneries. I used to think they looked like Madus, but those are the kinds of things you have to be careful when you say on the internet because then they're like, "Oh, these look like Madus." Garrett said, "So they're Madus now," and people would say that. I don't think you should do that. This is just like was just fun to try to figure out what these were. Why do these ones look different? What's going on? So anyway, he would send clutches of super dwarfs, and then he would send clutches of Kalatoas. He never managed to be able to pull the Anneries out of his Kalatoas. And there are some TK line Kalatoas down the road that did produce Anneries, but his original animals, I don't, as far as I know, they didn't actually produce Anneries. Um, it is running in the Kalatoa bloodline. So the misconception is that it's all one bloodline. It's actually many, 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 many different bloodlines. And then you have this side of like he would sell a super dwarf and then he would sell a Kalatoa. People are like, well, I bought one from him. It must be a Kalatoa or whatever. And I don't know that people went back and actually like tried to actually hold on a second. I think I have a cool souvenir in my wallet for you. This is one thing I always keep. It's razor blades and souvenirs. Let me make sure I actually have it. Oh, I might have taken it out recently. I cleaned my wallet. Darn it.
I might have a picture of it. I know what
Do
you're talking
you?
about. I might.
Okay. So I had an old thing from one of his last clutches. It actually wasn't one of mine or something that he gave me. It was something that he gave a buddy of mine named Paul Saplinkas. And so he had some original wild caught animals that produced two different clutches, two different females. So again, not one female, but two. They were born a couple months apart. That's how you know they're two different females, right? And it actually said like Kalatoa locale on the back. Locality wasn't a word that anybody used. And Paul was a zookeeper, and talking to Paul, he was like, hey, once I got more established with the super dwarfs, he's like, hey, would you be interested in any of my animals? And I was kind of like, well, like I like some of the stuff if they're pretty, those old TK super dwarfs. We have both in my shop. I have pure TK Kalatoas and pure TK super dwarfs. I know it sounds really confusing because you call them TK and everyone thinks it's one bloodline, but it's down to like the history of the importer, right? And whether or not people tracked it and not changing the name over time. So anyway, um, Paul showed me that old card, and I was like, that's exactly how Travis used to talk to me about it. And he very specifically, and Paul had said the same thing. He goes, no, he talked to him about that stuff too, and Paul had told him like, well, I'm only really interested in the Kalatoa ones. And so, if you want my opinion, the legitimate Travis Kubis Kalatoas were uglier than his pure Superdorf bloodlines. But his pure Superdorf stuff he had longer and worked with more elaborately, and they had the Annery in there, and so it was like 4, 5, and 6 generations captive bred and all this stuff. And the Kalatoa stuff, he had less of them. And some of them, like the ones that Paul got, were actually F1s. So it was pretty fun. And when
I,
Paul got out of it, I picked up his original blood
I
bug
could
too.
see where that could get confusing too, because if somebody had an old school TK and then they had a Kalatoa TK and they bred them together
There
and
you
they
go.
called them TK, right?
Right.
Which
For
is,
the record, everyone always likes to say that I spell stuff wrong. If you go back, oh, that's Karma
Viva.
and one of her babies. Lee, if
Sorry,
you
I
go
had
back
to
and
send
look
him
at
that
the
one.
way he spelled Kalatoa, that was the pre-internet way to spell that stuff. So it wasn't until internet warriors were invented that, or Google adopted one. So that's another
Oh,
debate for another time, how you spell all these different island names. I think there's merit to both. I'm always the guy that's like, I don't like changing things. If I got something as a super dwarf, I'm not going to call it a Kalatoa later. If it was Kalatoa all the way back to the importer, I'm going to call it Kalatoa. When I bought the animal, if the importer said it was Kalatoa and it's spelled this way, I just am honoring that. Like to me personally, the one that bugs me is not Kalatoa because it's pretty widely used that way. And it's only like the newer stuff that spells it differently. But Slayer, as far as I know, has always been spelled Selayar. But a lot of my Slayer stuff came to me Selayer. So I still call them that. Maybe I'm wrong in that. People really like to talk about that a lot, that I should spell everything the same. And I think there's merit to it. They might be right. Like if we all spelled all the names the same, it would make it more searchable or easy to find, and stuff like that. But I don't know. I like all my old maps, all the old. I'm just old, you know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like we talked about Burmese pythons, right? This is the example I always use. Does anyone here ever call them Myanmar pythons, or do you still call them
no.
Burmese python? Because you know Burma doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
It's Myanmar now. Did we all change because Google Maps says Myanmar? Like, if you can show me Burma on a Google map, and you know what I mean? So if you spell
Hmm.
something like the Google way and that's gospel truth, but you still call them Burmese pythons, I feel like I don't have to listen to you.
It's the same.
Yeah.
It's the same argument. Gray rat to black rat in Coluber. It
Yeah,
goes
it's
back
fun.
and
It's
forth,
an
and
argument worth
it's
having, and there's validity on both sides. I just choose the old man way. I think there was not that many people who did stuff like that back then. You know what I'm saying? So for me, it just feels like I'm not changing, dictating, stopping the buck here or anything. I'm just trying to connect like the small like remnants of stuff that was there with the newer generation of keepers. I would hope that people would take the work that I've done and the groundwork and all that stuff and continue to learn and press on and grow and develop the hobby and our knowledge, husbandry techniques, scientific evidence, maybe reclassifications are coming, and stuff like that. But like I said, I mean, you could debate whether or not Calatoas are even Jampayanas, because Jampayas were studied with Jampayanas and assumes they're related. Kind of like when they named Saputrii. But so I should back up. There's three currently like mostly recognized subspecies of reticulated pythons, right? So it's Malaya python reticulatus, and then it's reticulatus, Saputrii, and Jampayanus. I think there's probably more out there that need to be discovered. But right now, you have Sulawesi and this island chain, and everything around it that's all like connected this way is Malaya python reticulatus, or the mainland subspecies, even though mainland is a stupid word, anyways, because to me, mainland would mean like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia,
Yeah. That's what I
right? And
always
then when
like
you get
think
to
of when I hear
Sumatra,
mainland.
it's a giant island, but it's not the mainland. It's a big island, or Borneo is a big island. You know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
Selayar is a pretty small island, and then Tombolongan is like a microscopic island, and the size of the retics kind of correlates. So. But
mm,
anyway, I just like to sort of pass the history on, you know what I'm saying? I'm always saying I
Yeah.
understand like you want to stand on the shoulders of the people that come above you and try to reach new heights, not cut them off at the ankles and try to stand in their place. That's such a stupid way to do it. And that's what our hobby
Yeah.
loves to do. We love to just be like, let's kill that guy because I want what he has. And you're like, what?
Yes.
Just Like, I don't know, can't we all get along, I guess? But
Yeah.
This is like
And
one of the only industries where it's so prominent too. It's
well,
disturbing when you step back and look at how bad things can get. And by industries, I mean like actual industry, like automotive, painting, production, you name it. And there's some cutthroat behavior, but it's nothing like it is in snakes.
well, I think it's because we're at the reptile industry as a whole is getting bigger and more mainstream all the time. But is it really an industry? Like, I mean, if you look at just the number of people, let's say breeding snakes, there's a lot of people who keep and breed snakes, and they've done great work and they're doing awesome things. I mean, I'm sitting here in my basement, you know what I mean? We had a small setup, we're breeding some snakes in the beginning. Stuff starts to change when you make a living at that. Like when I lost that clutch, it wasn't just like, oh my gosh, I lost, I was going to make some money this year, or oh my gosh, my project is down, or something. Like it was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to feed my family? You know what I'm saying? Oh my gosh,
mhm.
maybe like I might quit and give up on this whole let's make dwarves and super dwarves more popular. You know, that almost ended it all. So when you talk about industry, the people that are arguing about a given subject, the one thing you can do is step back and say, do any of these people do this like professionally? As in, like, do you have a day job, or is this like, is this a hobby for you, or is this a thing? Because on the internet it's a great equalizer, and it's easy for all those words to sound the same. Someone can scream really loud about stuff, but the thing about it is this: we're all very passionate about our hobbies. How many times are you going to argue about your job? I'm a welder and I'm so passionate. I hope welders are really passionate, but when they go home and they're on the internet, they don't want to argue with people about welding after they've been welding all day long at work. You're gonna leave work at home and you're gonna be like, I love super dwarves and they should be spelled like this. You know what I'm saying? I'm a welder, but I really love super dwarves. You see what I'm saying? Like the
Yeah.
people that are doing that, these are hobbyists, not to take away from like, some cool breedings that they did or like world's first or anything in any way, shape, or form. I'm just talking about the psychology of what you argue about. You love to argue about your hobby. You said cars. I know a lot of diehard Ford versus Chevy guys. Do any of them work at the plant? No. You know what I mean? The guys that I know that work at like at the GM plant, they're like, oh, don't buy any Silverados. They left all those axles out in the rain last year. You know what I mean? That's going to cause some problems down the road.
That
Those are the
that's facts.
professional car guys. You know what I'm saying?
It's more of a fun argument than it is like an actual argument. The Chevy versus
It
Ford in
should
the
be a fun
industry.
argument. The weird dynamic with reptile keeping is this. We're a bunch of goobers. Like I'm mentioning scientific names and stuff like that. Um, these are all just things that we pick up and learn as we try to get deeper into our hobbies. You know what I'm saying? But like, where are the scientists? There's a few of them that participate in the reptile hobby, but the people arguing over the science of stuff are rarely scientists. The people argue about the breedings and stuff, they're rarely professional breeders. You know what I'm saying? These are usually hobbyists arguing about what they like, and that's fine, and they should. I just think the world is, again, old man, gray, karumpa haired Garrett is like, kids these days suck. Don't argue online and then smile when people are in person. You know what I'm saying? Don't yell at people when you're behind your car and then they step out and walk over to your car. You're like, oh, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mhm.
just be authentic all the time. You know what I'm saying? And if you
Yeah.
pretended like, because here's the thing, that troll on the other end of the internet is still a real person with actual problems. And so if I
Yeah.
wouldn't go say what I'm about to type out to them to their face or in person, because I wouldn't do that to a human being, then don't do it on the internet. Like
Yeah.
let's not hide behind a screen or whatever the saying is. Like these are real people. So like maybe you had to grow up before the internet to know that, like, human decency. You know what I'm saying?
I think
So I
people
don't
have
know. That's
forgotten
what I
that.
think it is. I think it's the
That
hobby. They're all let them blow off some steam. You know what I mean? They're coming off their jobs. They worked hard all day. They want to argue about some snakes. It should be a fun argument. The only time when it's not fun, here's the other thing the world doesn't know. You can disagree with people and still be cool about it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I guarantee if we sat down, the four of us, I can find all kinds of things you guys don't disagree with me on. You know what I'm saying? But
We
that doesn't have to slam your ego or
Or wait,
something
are you
like
on
that.
this side or that side?
I'm on
Me and Lee
the
disagree on shit all the time. Yeah, we're like
me
fucking
and
brothers at the
Bill
end of the day.
disagree on stuff. We have a lot of
If
stuff
you
that we
have that
disagree on.
respect for each other, that underlying just
Yeah.
human respect, then you can disagree. But when you're like, how could you say that? I hate you. And then it's like the don't talk to me. You don't agree with me. You know, like the sectioning off
Yeah.
of society. And that's not just the reptile industry, obviously, but it's bad for everybody. We need to be able to share ideas, learn new
Yeah.
things. If we keep
Yeah.
circling back to our same arguments that we've been having for 20 years, it doesn't help anything or anybody. That's
Yeah.
my old man 2 cents on it. Come on, kids. Sometimes I feel like the internet reptile dad or something like that. It's like breaking my children up or something. Like, come on, guys, get off each other. Let's
Yeah.
just chill out.
Oh,
So,
it's crazy
It's
that there are so many people in the reptile community that go is like hard on opinions and do things like, I mean, I'll give you acknowledgement for 30 seconds, the comment section where you can't just let people be, right? But then I'm in a crowd of 35,000 plus Tuesday night, Bad Omens. One of the coolest experiences I've had in my life. I'm surrounded by people and we've all got different opinions on bands, music tastes, who's better, who's not, you know, and yeah, you can break down the science of it and kind of get into it like in depth, but for the most part, we agree to disagree. We jump in the pit, we all love each other. Why the fuck can't the reptile community do that too? It's really not that difficult.
right. Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys
yeah.
aren't ready to tear each other's fucking heads off. Or like Garrett said, say that bullshit online constantly, you know?
No, I got
Yeah.
trucked in the
No,
pit, man. Like, and I got up, I looked at the dude, I was like, that was fun. Let's do it again. You know, the same dude I was having an argument with, who's better, Will Ramos or fucking Noah fucking Bad Omens?
Yeah.
that's
It's
it.
all just,
Yeah.
does it really change your life? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, like I
It's
said, it's hobbies. You know what I'm saying? People
yeah.
want to, you know, they're very passionate about it because it is their hobby. If it's their job, it's a different story. So if you just come at it with that perspective, then you know that's where you're at. You know what I'm saying?
And then, real quick question while we're on this. How have you put up? I'm not going to deep dive it. I don't care to. We all already know. But I want to know, what have you done to like make it through all the stuff that you faced? Like, how have you remained so patient, not giving up, not let this eat away at you, etc.?
I mean, you know, the big thing is like I don't like, you know, we do our marketing and stuff online and stuff like that, but you guys have watched some of like the live streams that we're doing. We're hatching eggs. Like we got babies, new babies hatching almost every day. If you tune in on Reach Out Reptiles on YouTube, we had that crazy pure slayer that hatched the other day. That stuff was really exciting. That's actually my day to day. You know, our business, like I have sales guys and marketing guys. Well, currently don't have a sales guy. Hoping to get one soon and marketing guys and stuff, they get to, you know, do that side of things. So I generally try to be very open with like our breedings or you know whatever we're doing, the policies, genetics, things like that. But I'm also not afraid to say like, hey, I'm seeing something here. Is anyone else seeing this? Like, what's going on with this kind of stuff? If as far as like you know, like establishing anery in the beginning. That was like a new thing, you know, and it took a minute
Mhm.
to for people to figure that out. So there's always going to be the next new thing as long as we're continuing to advance in the hobby. And we should be able to discuss that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's honestly not that hard because the real world is quite different than the internet world. So if people only connect online with each other, you will find those like, you know, feel good kind of echo chambers and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys noticed, like Reach Out Reptiles does post things on our social media and stuff, but we're not really arguing in the comments with people. I'm never calling specific people out or going at them or anything like that. I just have a more live and let live policy. And then we work like those people that have been around us, like I work quite hard. I put in a lot of hours. We give out, like, YouTube, we've got hundreds. I mean, I stopped counting after 500, but I feel like that was a couple years ago, of videos out that are all about dwarf and super dwarf retics and our experiences and what we're doing with them and all that stuff that's coming out. This is free information that we're working. Like, if you go be a YouTuber and put a video up once a week for like a year, see if you can do it. And make them interesting, it's that's a ruthless slave driver, not to mention any other social media stuff. So on the educational side, what we're putting out, that's one side of it. And then with the animals side, just continuing to further the bloodlines, put in the work. We've got our ideas about selective breeding and how to make snakes smaller and all this kind of stuff. And there's plenty of reasons that people disagree with that and everything, but I'm just doing the work. So, and I get super excited when we see the rewards of that stuff. So, like, watching baby snakes hatch, all that kind of stuff. That's what keeps us going. It's not necessarily about being right, like, especially if you are, like I said, a lot of us are pretending to be scientists all the time, and we're really just hobbyists here. You know what I mean? I wish scientific, like the real academic and scientific community, would take more look at these animals on these islands. That's like a future project that I'm also trying to work on.
Hmm.
But like we pretend to be all this stuff, but if you're actually scientifically minded, I mean, you remember, well, I don't know if you guys are my age, but when I was a kid, there was a brontosaurus. And then when I was in high school, they're like, no, there's no brontosaurus anymore. And now there's a brontosaurus again. You know what I mean? And it's like science is constantly like, wait, oops, we got that wrong. Let's figure this out. Let's do this. Let's do that. And what's
Yeah.
funny is, like, there's a lot of cool sauropods, but if you know anything about brontosaurus, it's probably that story. Is it brontosaurus? Is it apatosaurus? Is the wrong head on there? And sometimes just having that story is fun.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've made that comment or analogy or similar to it a few times since starting this. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah, everything is new. We're always constantly learning, and that's the part of science, is learning new things and being open to it. It's not just the way it was 50 years ago, and very few things are what we think they were. You know what I mean? So it's always changing.
Right.
So
But anyways,
yeah.
Burning
How's
hot
that
question.
Retic Fest planning coming, Garrett?
oh, it's coming. We actually, so Retic Fest is pretty fun. That's a good example of, like, being somewhere in person or whatever. But yeah, Bill, we have just put out the save the date. It's going to be the last Saturday in July. That's like a Patreon appreciation thing. As always, I think we're going to try to get your daughter out doing some tattoos and things like that, and things getting bigger and bigger. Haven't locked down the speaker yet, but I'm pretty excited about who should be coming. Last year was a lot of fun. We had Clint out. A lot of people got to meet him. The year before that, we had Ed and Emily from Snake Discovery. That was pretty cool. So it was like more YouTuber-y people. So this year we're swinging the pendulum back. The year before that, we had Daniel Solis out. He was talking about his adventures on the island, and even Chad Brown, who started with some of those like early coyotes and stuff like that. So we're swinging the pendulum back, getting some snake people in for speakers. It's going to be pretty cool. We're keeping it kind of chill. Last year was our 10-year anniversary, and so yeah, we want to bring it back down or whatever. And I don't know if that's going to
Nice.
work. I don't know. It was like over 200 people last year, so it's getting a little out of hand.
All right. Well, I'm glad there's that many Retic people that are coming to party. I love it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. I mean, there was a couple things I wanted to touch on, like size-wise and stuff like that. Like back when the super dwarves were becoming popular and a thing and stuff like that, what did they do to kind of realize, like, hey, these are different? Like, what did some guys like grab them and be like, oh, they're just not feeding them enough or not whatever? And then what ended up happening with like some of those first animals that had those experiments done, I guess.
You're
To
talking
see.
about like the dwarf retics and stuff back in
Yeah, the
the
dwarf
90s and
retics
France?
and yeah.
There was a couple of different people that had done some stuff. One of the ones that I thought was pretty neat was somebody took what they did was they took, and I can't remember if this was dwarf or super dwarf. They were pures of something. It could have been Jamps or it could have been Calatoas. I don't recall anymore. But they took a mainland baby and then they took two of these locality animals and they said, okay, we're going to establish. Here's the diet. We're going to give them. I think they said it was like 15% of their body weight once a week. And they had the mainland on that and then the super dwarf on that. So that way, like if the mainland's growing bigger, for example, the 15% is going to go up in size. If the super dwarf is staying smaller or growing bigger or whatever, they're just going to adjust accordingly. And then they took the other dwarf or super dwarf, again, I can't remember exactly what locality it was. And they said, okay, on this one, we're going to actually feed it 15% of its body weight twice a week. And then they just recorded their results. I can't remember how long they went. I think they originally said they were going to do a year and see if it turned out any different, but after 6 months, like the results were like shockingly different. So of the two super dwarves or dwarves, whatever they were, I mean, obviously the one that was fed once a week as a super dwarf, 15% of its body weight stayed significantly smaller. The mainland got exactly as expected, mainland size, on that same diet. The interesting thing was the dwarf or super dwarf that was fed twice weekly ended up being like bigger than the other super dwarf that was fed half as much, but it was closer in size to the super dwarf than it was in the mainland. So it really showed like genetics are playing a big part in this. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
that was some of the stuff that they did, but that was just very basic. Like when they saw these small animals, I think the original theory was these are small because there's no food on the island. So it's basically islands of starving snakes. And actually, what we know now is actually quite different. Where, like, especially on, according to Daniel Solis, who was watching the Kalatoas in the wild, he would go in a cave system where they have, I mean, as you can imagine, tons of bats flying by and stuff. And he said, this is like, looks like it's the big majority of these guys' diets. There's two species of bats, an insectivorous one, a frugivorous one. They're both the size of about medium rats and the snakes can eat as many of them as they can catch. But a lot of times they got to tackle them, fall down, climb back up the wall, grab some more or whatever, and they're going through and just snagging those up. So
Hmm.
that's how they're eating in the wild. The question I think that nobody is able to necessarily answer or whatever is like how often, how much, how many, you know what I'm saying? So like I used to think one of my original thoughts on the whole thing was like these guys are probably like nailing the occasional seagull. You know what I mean? Maybe they get 3 or 4 of them a year and that's it. But it sounds like they're getting actually a lot more of like the really small regular diet stuff. So
Yeah.
like I said, Daniel said he actually watched one of them eat 3 of them in a row right there, just boom, 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 and ate 3. But
Hmm.
are they like gorging themselves, every day? Are they, whatever it is, but it's smaller food items that they have to work pretty hard for. So seemed
Yeah.
interesting. That's the kind of
Yeah.
stuff like I would love to know more about is like, so, okay, so they have an unlimited food source theoretically. Is it seasonal? Are they continually eating? Because like I know my superdose in captivity, they'll eat every day if you give it to them for sure. You know
Mhm.
what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
where's it going for that?
Well, and what's like the bats, I guess, like calorie breakdown, like, how is are bats really fatty? Or are they super high in protein and all that movement going up? Is it
I
really just
can't
all for
imagine
not
they're very
much?
fatty.
That's what I'm
You
kind
know
of
what I
thinking,
mean?
right? So
Right.
that's kind of what I was leaning to is they're probably on a very high protein, low fat type diet and all that exercise and all that activity going into it. They're probably just burning a lot, it seems like,
Yeah.
as well.
They have nutritional studies on like almost everything where they've like ground up almost every animal you can think of and looked at the caloric, value of them and stuff like I bet you could look up both kinds of bats and figure out what their calorie
I
intake
bet. I
is, because
bet.
that's a big part of studying like any animals in the wild is dietary stuff, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's super interesting. Like I will eventually we want to do a podcast on size because I have my own theory, which is very similar to yours, and it's based off of my own anecdotal experience. Of course, I mean that's all as hobbyists can say is because it's just my little scenario with my bloodlines, my genetics that I'm working with. But yeah,
Talking
I
about
mean small.
crosses and selective breeding for size.
Yeah, yeah,
I gotcha.
yeah. That's kind of where I'm at because I think there's a misconception of that, and I think there's also like a concerted effort to make that information really muddied because I'm sure there's jealousies or fears and all sorts of different things that go into wanting that to not be like a reality.
Well, I can't think of another kind of retic that you have the size disparity between, let's say, the smallest of super dwarves and the largest of retics. That's a massively
Yeah.
different scale. And so when you start putting these two ends together, you know what I mean, and trying to get a desired result, it's a whole new thing.
Yeah.
And when it comes to reptiles, I mean, they've done it with dogs, horses, all these other kinds of things over time. So we have at least some stuff to look at, but there's also just a lot of stuff that we don't understand about, retics and sizes and reptiles in general. You know what I mean? You have arguments like indeterminate growth, how far does that go, all this kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
that stuff is pretty cool. I think those are the conversations that are totally worth having if you can. Well, like if you have people that are trying to breed for different things and get a different desired size result, but nobody's talking to each other, sharing results or tracking stuff over time or anything like that, it's going to take you forever to find that stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, where are the consistencies, where are the outliers, you know what I'm saying? How do you narrow it down or veer in a certain direction? There's a lot of different stuff. I've got my own theories and stuff about how that might work. I mean, certainly we've done a lot of breeding over a long period of time, so we've seen
Yeah.
any kind of results that you can possibly get. But why does it work? Like, let's say a
Yes.
certain thing works. Why does it work is a whole other question. I think as a industry right now, we're still arguing about if a certain thing works. You know what I'm saying? So you can't even get
Yeah.
to the layers of why yet.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you on that one for sure. Yep.
there you go.
All right, boys. Anything else?
No,
Okay.
hold on. No, we are not ending the
Oh.
podcast yet. I have a burning hot question.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on.
All right.
Garrett,
all right,
what's
all
up with the
right.
house snakes?
Oh, yeah. I knew that was coming.
Super
I
duper
knew that
dwarves.
was coming.
What do you mean? What's up with them?
You still
Like, should
head
you
over
get
here?
some?
Like, I mean,
Oh, I have-
tried.
I have more than
might
ever.
again. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So
Resell me on it. Resell me on getting into house snakes.
All right. So this is the only other species that I actually breed, and this is a newer thing. I think I've been doing it for when did I get the first ones? I don't even know. I'm 4 generations in, but that doesn't necessarily say that much. They're pretty quick turnaround time. But anyways, fell in love with them in a big way. I got the very first ones because I did like a cash and trade with a guy because I wanted to sell him some snakes. His name was Warren Klein. And he's kind of like the OG house snake guy. He wanted some retics that I had. And so I was like, he's like, well, how about this much money and some house snakes? And I was like, okay, Then I got the house snakes and I really liked them. And I'd seen them before. I thought they were interesting looking. You don't see too many of them, but I'd seen some in pet shops and things over the years and stuff like that. And I don't know, man, they're super cute and fun. I like all kinds of reptiles. And so, but I've never really been, you said you're like a colubrid guy, I'd never really been like a colubrid guy. I think some colubrids are like the most beautiful animals on the planet. You know what I'm saying? But they didn't have it in the personality department for me. you know.
Okay.
And so when I started keeping the house snakes, in the beginning, the babies are very colubrid-esque, but then as they mature out, they change a lot. And they reminded me a lot more of like Antaresia or something like that. They're like non-colubrity. So even in the time that I was keeping them, I don't know exactly when the study came out or if I just saw it later, if it happened while I was doing it, but they reclassified them and pulled them out of being colubrids. They're still colubroids, but they're more closely related to a lot of venomous stuff and other things. So I was like, this makes sense
Mhm.
that they seem like a different kind of snake, different behaviors and everything. And to be clear, I really only work with like mostly Cape Pensis. I have some of the Lineatus and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I don't know, we produced like 2,500 last year or something like that. And I just
Okay.
mostly keep them all. They're really tiny. You can just keep having more and more and more. So they're really fun with me too. Um, because they're not nearly like you get some really expensive retics and stuff like that. If you want like the smallest snake of the coolest new morph, you can expect to pay a lot more. But the house snakes, like there's so many cool morphs that are like super cheap, couple $100. You can get really cool stuff and everything like that. So yeah, I've just been tinkering with them, having fun with them, keeping way too many of them. You know, I've bought a few new morphs that popped up over in Africa. I'm like, ooh, bring those over here. So I guess word is out that Garrett likes the house snakes because when people will find them and send them over, and then we've got like up to triple homozygous recessive starting from scratch and everything. So it's been pretty fun. So they're cool. I'm really enjoying the husbandry side of them right now because they are super easy to keep and undemanding and yeah, lots of fun. So. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't know. I dig it. If you come out to Retic Fest, you'll have to see the house snake collection. It's getting kind of insane. Bill's seen it, but it's been a while because you missed a year, and we've been, as populations do, they're exploding. So
Yeah,
we
they
we
sure
got
are. They sure
We'll be
are.
there this year. The three of us are
yeah,
planning on coming. Stella's coming. I got
Mhm.
it. I'm going to be there with Stella.
yeah, yeah. That'll be a blast. Everyone's excited to see you guys again. So
Are you going to get a
yeah.
wait list going again for her?
Yeah, it's already set up. Where I think Callie is the one that plans that for me. I think she's already talking with Stella about it. So we'll set up like how many people want to book with her while they're there or whatever. And then if she can do a couple extras after that, that's fine. But we'd rather have a smaller number of people that know what they can get done and go from there.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your most anticipated like pairing clutch, something that you're hoping to produce this year? Like what's your
Ooh.
holy grail for the year?
I think we just hatched it the other
Yeah,
day. I
well,
just wasn't expecting it. It was
you
just
can't
a
count the ones that have already hatched. What's going on
it,
into the
it
future?
was
Not the ones
just
that
a
already hatched.
surprise. We're not allowed to talk about that, huh?
Yeah.
Wow.
No,
I
no,
don't
you
know
can
if you
talk
could
about it because
top
it is really,
that.
really cool. No,
I gotta
that would
hang
I
my
can.
hat up on that one.
Do you want me to
yeah.
I
put
mean,
it up?
yeah, go
Do you
ahead.
want?
I had a
Yeah,
2 egg clutch, then half of it was a total surprise. So, mention pure
yeah.
localities. I've got a few different bloodlines. This one to
God,
me raises some interesting scientific questions. Those are the two babies. These are pure slayers. Um, and I did not expect this to happen. I don't breed a lot of slayers. They're quite large. So I don't do a lot of that stuff, but we have three different bloodlines of pure slayers at Reach Out Reptiles, and my adults are like, I don't know, for the different bloodlines, like 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that. Across the different animals. I think a couple of them are actually up to 10 years old now. And so I'm trying to get the next generation going. And so, yeah, just breeding them forward a generation. And something that I was found interesting, I was talking to conservationists, and I used to be like say the Karampas, like let's say I had four of these adults. I'd want to like breed these two and then these two and then pick an offspring from each and breed them together and keep them diverse, right? But what a lot of these guys do that are actually involved in conservation projects when they're planning out their breedings, they try to keep bloodlines distinct from each other so that they have different directions. So I don't know. I'm kind of listening to the guys that are the experts in that, and I say, all right, well, I'll forward. I have done crosses of the different bloodlines and slayers and stuff in particular, but I have these three bloodlines. So I'm like, I'll breed them each forward one generation. Well, the rarest bloodline that I have, my animals are from a very interesting female that was like a parthenogenic baby herself. And so like all 100% homozygosity, no diversity in her at all, but she wasn't really related to anything else in the country. And then I bred her to well, it was actually not me, it was Don Munson, it was a buddy of mine, bred her to a wild caught male and made, a clutch of babies. And I got a pair from those and I've been hanging out and just holding them. So I bred them together. The female she's a weenie snake. She's been a problematic one. And I always get like small, infrequent clutches from her and stuff. And so anyway, I figured it was time to put them together, get some pures from that bloodline and move it forward into the future. And so we hatched two eggs, and these are fresh out of the egg. Actually, the picture that you just showed of them out of the egg is from this morning. So out of the
Let me
egg,
put
it
that
looks
back up.
like,
Hold
yeah, so the
on.
one to the right there looks a lot like grandma. The really unique, pretty, these are very like black and yellow slayers with really striking pattern. The one to the left appears to be an anerythristic,
Ooh.
which
I
is
would say
pretty
so.
interesting to me because the slayers they're Saputrii. I mean, Saputrii is the Sulawesi locality. They're not supposed to be related to the other like Jamps and stuff like that. And so, why would you have Anery in things like Jamps and Kalatoas and Karampas and Madus, and then also in Slayers if they don't have a shared ancestry? Is that convergent evolution? Like it was a thing that happened. And I mean, you could watch our videos live and see all this stuff going down, but it's incredible to me that we hatched an Anery Slayer. I don't think I do know of like Slayer crosses that have produced Aneries in the past. Um, but them being crosses, it was always like, well, I don't know. Was it from the Slayer? I don't know. Was there something else in there? What's going on? But I've never heard of pure Slayers producing
Yeah.
Aneries. So apparently I have a pair of Het Anery pure Slayers, which is crazy. And the other part is grandma, right, was the parthenogenic animal. She's not an anery, and she's not a het because you can't have het anything with partho. So it's really easy to know who the founding animal was. It was the dad had to be a het anery coming in. So thank
Huh.
goodness the two that I kept ended up being het anery. So I wasn't looking forward to it. I mean, I was. It's always a good day to produce pure locality animal, but to hatch an anery was pretty wild. I was pretty excited about that.
Wow.
So
Wow.
the next clutch that's slated to produce or to hatch is actually, I guess they call them mocha mels, Indo caramel and mocha on
Mhm.
one snake. And if we're lucky, we'll get an anery version of that. So that might be cool. So
That
those are gonna
probably
hatch
will be
any
pretty
day.
cool.
I don't know that they're not been produced too many times in mainlands. I don't think anyone's ever produced them in dwarf and super dwarf.
There
So
hasn't ever been an Anery Mocha, has there?
not yet. I have mochinos. We just actually hatched some of those the other day. So the
Yeah.
Anery mochinos are cool. They're like purple and stuff when they hatch out. They're really wild. So we have
But
mocha in dwarf and super dwarf, and I have a head Anery, but no visual Anerys yet.
which one is the zombie? Is that Orange Glow or is that the Mochino? The
That
zombie
is
snail.
a mochino Anery golden child.
That's right. Okay.
So they're like purple and green, and the golden child like blended the color through the whole animal. It just looked like the gnarliest, like dead flesh or bruise that you've ever seen. It was crazy. But yeah.
Yeah.
You watching?
Nice. Right. Like my last one. How many? I don't know if you can answer this way. How many known lines are there of each locality? Or if you can't answer that, how many do you work with? Of each
I don't
locality.
even know if I could answer that. I mean, it was kind of like I was saying, there's actually stuff out there kicking around in people's garages. There are some, we were talking about hobbyists. There are some very, very passionate hobbyists out there. I mean, prior to 2015 and all that kind of stuff, these guys were all hobbyists that were, it's kind of like boutique breeding or whatever, and everyone had their little dinker project. So there's a lot. I think there's more than any of us actually realize. We tend to focus on the really visual side of it or whatever, like optics wise. But we've got the three localities of Slayer, or three bloodlines, sorry, of Slayer. There's only the one bloodline of Tom Belongin that's in the US, but there are others elsewhere in the world. In fact, Karsten posted a picture a couple years ago of a phenomenal new imported, like very weird, possible new morph looking Tom Belongin that was really cool. As far as the Kiowatis go, I mean, just guessing at this point, it's probably like half a dozen of those that have been established. Um, and again, it depends on how you split it up. Like, is the Doc Murdoch line one line, or is that more lines? You know what I mean?
Mm.
Because it's definitely at least two lines. But this line wasn't really a line because that was a male. You know what I'm saying? So like, there's a ton of lines if you consider crosses, because like that male bred to a non-pure Coyote and has made offspring. We have some at the shop, so they're unrelated to any pure Coyotes that are out there. But we won't be able to make pures anymore at this point because there are no females. So there's stuff like that. The Kalatoas, I have a decent number of bloodlines of those. I don't think I've sat down and counted them up or like differentiated, because like I said, sometimes you crisscross them, you know what I'm saying? So like,
Mm-hmm.
if you go back to like original founding animals, it's probably like six bloodlines or something. But then by the time you
Mm.
cross this one to this one and this one to this one
Yeah,
and
it
this one to
creates a
this
new
one,
one.
you're getting, yeah, they're not like entirely new, but they're definitely
Yeah.
branching out and diversifying a lot. Um, the Karampas, there's I mean, you can get two pure distinct bloodlines that are 100% unrelated to each other, and then there's like an extra animal, that in the mix. I'm missing Madu's two different bloodlines. Um, Sometimes the bloodlines though, like are one animal. Like I have one Madu female that's unrelated to everything else. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But she can't really make her own bloodline. You know what I'm saying? Because you got to breed her to something that's a
Something.
Madu, right? So I don't know. It's messy.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest thing. Did I miss any? I think I covered them all there. Jamps, there's I mean, the ones that are really well known are like the Debord line jamps and the Gaspar jamps. And then we have our own pair of wild caught jamps I've produced off the male, not the female. I still have her. So I still have some original wild caught animals there. I would love for her to give me eggs someday. That would be cool because I'd like to breed her into the wild caught male to the wild caught female. Because then you would have a third, like basal and completely distinct line of jamps, not Debord, not Gaspar. Even the Gaspar line, like everybody knows that, but those animals I think were originally bred by Al and Cindy Baldago. So sometimes you have to like trace it back a little further because people say, oh, there's this other bloodline. But like I said, back in the beginning, everyone just used to name them after the breeders, even if that breeder had multiple bloodlines. So got pretty confusing.
Yeah. I could see that.
Mm.
I could see that for sure. And then, because I know it's going to be brought up and stuff like that, there are the famous jamps that people had that were pretty big, and I've seen those pictures of them, but they looked quite thick, if you will.
Yeah, well, that I think you're. I mean, I don't know if you're talking about everything, but I think you're talking about the Gaspar line jamps.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They were part of their own experiment where those guys were, feeding them up, and yeah, they got really big. But they were like, you could tell, like,
Yeah.
I don't even think it was like I think it's like a bad thing to be like, let me make my snake as fat and unhealthy as I can. But that's not what they were really doing. That was pretty early on, and that was still like, if we fed them, how big would they get? And they did get quite big, but you could also tell like this is not a natural looking snake, like tiny little head, like you said, really thick, all that kind of stuff. So it's like you can make any snake super obese, you know what I'm saying? But like, I don't know
Mhm.
why you would want to do that. I don't think you should underfeed or overfeed any of them. Feed them feed them like a snake and let their genetics do the rest. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah. That's how I feel about it. Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah. What do you got? Anything else, Bill or Levi, on the history?
I don't think so.
No.
I think
I'm
we
good.
covered it. It was a pretty good
Okay.
explanation. I really appreciate you coming on here, Garrett. Taking time out. I know it's late there. We really do appreciate it, and got a lot of good knowledge. It was very great.
absolutely. Well, I'm really excited to see like you guys and other people, you know what I mean, just continuing to expand the hobby and all that kind of stuff. I think at the end of the day, these are really fun animals. Like, going back to 15-year-old picture of Garrett and stuff like that. It's super cool blessing to be able to actually do this for a living. And it's been really neat with like, all the people that we get to interact with on a daily basis and all that kind of stuff is really, really cool. So appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah.
It's been a wild ride. I'm very interested, like I said, for as far as Reach Out Reptiles as a business. The last 10 years has been pretty cool. I
Yeah.
have big plans for the next 10 years. We'll see where it goes. And then you throw an Anery Slayer into the mix every now and then, you know what I mean? It's definitely going to
It
keep it
just kind of,
exciting.
yeah, you got to have to have a little
Like what
spice
does
in
that
there.
even
little
mean now?
of that.
You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean?
Little,
Yeah.
hey, a little Slayer, a little Anery Slayer right there.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
not something that you can force. It's just something that happens. So.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have
Agreed.
to, like I said, I want to do our Super Doors reel. That would be a cool one to have you back on. If not, that's totally fine. But, I also want to kind of get your thoughts on what the future looks like for Super Dwarves and what is your future specifically for Reach Out Reptiles? Like or Garrett, just what is Garrett's future looking like? What are his plans?
Sure.
So we could get there.
Part 2.
Sounds like a fun episode. Yes,
Part
sir.
2. I like it. Okay. All right.
Then we'll touch
boys.
on me
All
seeing
right.
the house snake collection. I'm really excited about that.
There's a few.
Yeah.
You can spend all day in there and not look at a snake twice. So
Yeah, one or two, a couple. There's a couple in there for sure. One or two.
Yeah.
One or two.
Yeah.
No big deal. Right, boys.
All right.
Let's
All right.
Well, thanks,
Call it
fellas.
a night.
Appreciate
Yep.
you guys.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Yep.